here today. This is CoMotion and CoMotion LAB, and John, I think our mayor changed CoMotion to collaboration in motion. So we're gonna have to work on that. CoMotion LAB is a consortium of public sector and private sector stakeholders, whose goals is to improve mobility and transit in Miami-Dade County and the general South Florida. In 2021, this particular year, emerging from the situation that we endured last year, CoMotion LAB is releasing two task forces on two key challenges for our community. The first one, urban air mobility, and you guys heard a little bit about it yesterday. And today we're going to be talking about the curb and smart infrastructure, which you might say is a little bit more concrete. And you like that. So I'm here with Janet from Lacuna, representing the task force, to share a little bit of how we're thinking to leverage the new and open source technology so we can better orchestrate the curbs and manage our roads. And I'd like to thank first the task force members, the Miami Parking Authority, the City of Miami, VIA, and HNTV for their ongoing effort and dedication toward this process. So please help me give a round of applause. Yes. But I also want to highlight the powerful engine of innovators that is behind this as well. We have Wise Moving Technologies, Pay by Phone, Avigilon, Genetech LPR, who are all helping the Miami Parking Authority to be the leader in this conversation. And I'm really glad that they're here with us and whose technology will be used in the task force. And you probably know that cities all over the nation and the world are experiencing a huge increase in demand on the curb. We had this situation for years, right? You guys know on-street parking, bus stop, and freight. What's happening right now is we also have on-demand deliveries, ride-hailing, and e-commerce. We have now a resurgence of outdoor patio dining, and let's not forget the arrival of adding more bicycle facilities, which often can be in conflict with the curb. In Miami, like many other places, the curb is packed. We see it, and it's creating inefficiency for everyone. Our vision is to make sure that municipalities, mobility operators, and everyone out there can use technology to orchestrate the public right away, to make sure that we follow through our responsibility and manage that demand there, that we use our space for all the residents of Miami-Dade County most effectively for our community. And today I want to share some of the innovative solutions that we're exploring through the curb pilot in Miami, which see to look at how we can tackle the situation that we have. And if you don't believe me about curb and the challenge that we have, let's just walk around after this meeting, you'll see what's going on. So what we're doing and we're trying to seek in our pilot is to create a functional proof of concept, curb and road management that integrates the digital represented city policies. We've done curb management with analog signs. So no parking zones from this hour to this hour, here or not there. A lot of this can create confusion. How we can digitize and make it more accessible. And ultimately to improve the efficiency on that space. We don't want to just replicate the no parking zone from 4 to 6, Alex. I think it's not only that. How can we really use this technology to evolve from this? So the pilot is taking place in the near vicinity that you have in here. I have a map for you to look at it. We have two zones where we're creating innovation technology zone in downtown Miami, where the Miami Parking Authority already have sensors in place, in-ground sensors and cameras to understand the occupancy on the loading zones. And we do have in the Civic Center, Health Center area, already a micro-transit mobility solution that we're using for moving people around. We're trying to explore more of that. The pilot would help Miami work towards a more environmental safety and efficient outcomes to enable private sector operators like our partner VIA to easily ingest that data via API and make sure the system is more seamless. And not only for parking, let's talk about congestion. How many of you have just drive around looking for parking spots, right? Everyone. And we don't want the on-demand transit services that's supposed to improve mobility to encounter the same situation. Well, Now I'm going to invite Janet. I think she's going to do a lot better job than me in explaining what we're doing. Janet from Lacuna to help us kind of walk through digital policy demonstration. And just to keep this brief, because I know you guys are going to want to hear the next panel, which is going to be phenomenal. We're going to focus on how we're changing the city analog policies into digital and how we're delivering those two APIs. Thank you, Janet.
Great. Thank you, Carlos. And hi, folks. Again, my name is Janet Titzler, and I lead curb management product initiatives at Lacuna. So as Carlos mentioned, cities can craft policies to achieve a number of environmental, safety, equity, and efficiency outcomes. When this policy is communicated digitally, as opposed to analog, as Carlos said, it can be more flexible, it can be standardized, and it can contain complexities that couldn't easily be printed on a sign. For example, communicating temporary road closures is something that's heavily manual today. And these changes are not always communicated to mobility operators and others prior to encountering them in the streets. Actually, just yesterday, over on Northeast First Avenue, right around the corner, it was closed for road work. But Lyft didn't know, routed our driver directly through it. Obviously, they could not drive through the massive pit in the ground. And so we ended up walking, kind of to the side of the road work. So that's not a huge deal, but in a situation where maybe the road is closed for something like a fire or something else, that can get dangerous. And so it's good to be able to communicate that to operators and others prior to arriving at the scene. So that's a little real life anecdote, but I'm going to walk through a simple hypothetical from start to beginning of a temporary road closure, showing the simplicity of communicating these ground truths through MDS digital policy. So to set the situation, Universal Pictures, the production company, has filed for a road closure permit for 2 blocks of Southwest First Street for 3 nights from 4 p.m. to 8 p.m. to film a stunt scene in the 10th installment of the esteemed Fast and Furious franchise. I don't know if we've got any fans out there who are looking forward to June 24th. I know I am. So a simple enough policy on the surface, just a road closure, but they also want no parking anytime for these 3 days, even during the hours that through traffic is allowed. This complexity would be difficult to feature on a sign alone, but can be communicated relatively simply through digital policy. So now let's look at who is involved in making this road closure policy and who might be affected by it. So Mary, as we'll call her, the policymaker, is an authorized official in charge of regulating and managing the right-of-way. Now the mobility operators include all of those commercial providers integrated to the MDS system. This could be on-demand delivery, parcel delivery like UPS, ride sharing like Uber or Lyft, or others. So in this pilot, we're working with VIA, who run a public transit service in Miami called Go Connect. Some of you may have used it before. Here, VIA needs to be alerted of this closure so they can implement the rules in their routing algorithms. This includes no traffic or no through traffic from 4 to 8 p.m., but also that passenger loading outside of these hours is permitted, even though parking is not. So here you can see a mock-up of what these rules might look like if they were only available via signage. So obviously this does not scale for every potential road closure, everything like that. But when we look at this set of policies, these can be managed digitally. Here's an example interface of some of the other policies Mary might manage. Now, Mary needs to be able to add the new rules of this road closure to this interface and needs to be able to communicate those. So here, Mary can input specifics of the policy and make it accessible to those integrated to the MDS system. Apologies if this is a little small for those in the room, but she can include a unique policy name, the period for which this policy is live, name specific rules, like no vehicles allowed from 4 to 8 p.m., and no parking in pay by phone zone 40206 anytime in these 3 days. So once the policy is authored and published and integrated operators are notified of the changes, in this example, that's VIA, but in the future, it could be someone like Pay by Phone. They would also be notified and they would disable the parking registration ability in this zone that they manage. So then we get to VIA. And now VIA can take steps to take the codified version of this policy that Mary just authored, which you can see a snippet of here, and choose how to incorporate it into their system. So this is an example of their routing system that they use. So VIA is now able to update the policy in the internal routing tool. As you can see, the street is now closed to VIA's system. That's what the concentration of red means. And they're able to route drivers around the closure, avoid a run-in with Vin Diesel stunt driving, and continue to create a seamless experience for their drivers and riders. Now, because VIA is integrated, the city is able to measure policy compliance and see if the policy is achieving those desired outcomes. If not, they're able to update and republish the policy quickly and as needed. Without digital policy, iteration would typically take months versus feedback is available here in real time. Given that this policy actually only lasts 3 days, the real-time information is critical if they need to make any changes. So operators can improve their operation when reliable ground truth is known, and cities are able to take a more iterative approach to policy setting, measuring, and updating to sooner achieve the desired environmental, safety, equity, and efficiency outcomes they want. So I am going to hand it back to Carlos to give us a little bit of a bigger picture and
Excellent. So let me just take a step back and talk about the big picture, the larger vision. The first thing is that this task force is about collaboration, and it brings public sector, private sector, mobility providers, and everyone around together. And the beauty of it, that this is not just about Miami. Not only the same problems that it appears in other cities, but what we're building here is fully scalable. It can expand the city management model to other cities that can take, benefit from, and expand upon. And it builds on the great work that the Open Mobility Foundation is doing. To make sure, and this is something that is clear, in order to make sure for us that this effort continues to be thoughtful, holistic, and a national scale approach, we need national freight and delivery partners at the table. So I invite these national partners out there. They're already doing great things for our communities like UPS, FedEx, Amazon, DoorDash, Postmates, and so many others to participate in this pilot. We invite you to share your needs and expertise and integrate with and test this technology here in Miami and know and understand that from here it can go to the rest of the world. I'm excited for this pilot. I'm excited to work with all the partners that we have and the opportunity to bring everyone together on this. The vision for Miami, Miami-Dade County is big, and definitely we want to deliver on it, and we can do it together with all of you. And if you want to know more about this, please don't step up of your seats. There's a lot more and great information here. We have a great panel. This one thing I can promise is going to be very energetic, entertainment, putting pressure on you all. Long live the curb. Thank you.
All right, testing. Can you hear me? All right. Well, really appreciate Mayor Carlos Cruz and really appreciate that intro. And I will say, you know, I think he stole a bit of my thunder. He really kind of all of my talking points for the intro of this panel. You know, I was going to say all the same things, but thank you for saving me some time. I think he's one of the hardest working men at this conference so far. So appreciate that. And I will say, you know, what they were talking about actually hit home for me. I gave my first Uber and Lyft rides about 7 years ago and started realizing, you know, just when you're driving around as an Uber driver, you know, taking passengers down the street, that's the easy part. But when it comes to picking up and dropping off, that's where the issues start to arise. And I think that this panel that we're going to talk about today on the curb is exactly what we're going to go into. So enough for me. I'm going to give each panelist about 30 to 60 seconds for a short intro of who they are and what they're up to, and then we'll get started.
Okay, thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Giulio Profumo. I am the CFO of Helbits. We are a micromobility operator. We're operating here in Miami as well. You will see our scooters around. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is John Ellis, president of Ellis Associates, a Lacuna Technologies company. On the panel today, representing the Curb Task Force with CLAB and the good work that we're doing that you just heard from Janet and Carlos.
Good afternoon. I'm the CEO for the Miami Parking Authority, responsible for the public parking on the on-street and the off-street for the city of Miami and some parts of the Miami-Dade County.
Alex, I'm going to have some questions for you for sure. And then my name is Harry Campbell. I am the founder of The Rideshare Guy. It's a blog, podcast, YouTube, digital media business for Uber and Lyft drivers and other gig workers. And, I think for a lot of the workers, the curb is an important place, for the reasons I mentioned. And, I think that we're seeing a lot of activity there these days. John, I want to actually start with you. You've got over 25 years of experience managing public, private. Well, that's at least according to your bio. 25 years of experience. The question I thought in my mind to start this conversation is, are the issues and all of the demands we're seeing on the curb, is that new? Is that something that, has it always been a lot of competition over the curb? What's changed right now? Like, why is the curb so exciting or so different right now, if it is at all?
I can certainly give an opinion. I think it probably might be better from Alex in that regard, but no, from the standpoint of why now versus maybe 15 years ago or 20 years ago, is because of the kinds of companies that you just talked about. The innovation that's happening in the private sector, being able to connect me as a very distinct and unique individual to a company trying to sell me a very distinct and individual thing that exists somewhere else, and it's got to come to me. And that might be a ride, it might be a package, it might be a product, it might be a service, but at the end of the day, the ability to do this very uniquely differentiated service offering is unique today and in the last few years. And that is what is actually driving a lot more pressure on the curb. I mean, we see increases in packages and deliveries and others, and the pandemic is a perfect example, right? So has it always been a tension point? Absolutely. Major cities around the world have always been a tension point. It's just more pronounced now because of the innovation that was coming. And so the real question is, how do cities come together and collectively acknowledge this? Because it has to be a collective answer. Because UPS, while they might care about Alex and Miami, what they really care about is the 10,000 cities that they operate in, or any of the other big companies. So I think what's unique today is cities beginning to acknowledge and recognize that a solution exists, but it can't just be paper. There is some technology that must happen, and the cities are probably best suited to be able to start standing up together and responding to the exact same innovation with their own innovation.
Yeah. And I mean, I think the curb is so interesting because like you mentioned, there are, we're talking big players here that all want access. You mentioned DoorDash. That's a 50 billion market cap company, UPS, right? I mean, all of these players. So, I mean, Alex, what do you think is the state of the curb right now? Because it really is on the cities. I mean, let's be honest, UPS is not thinking about the DoorDash workers, right, who are picking and going for packages, or maybe even other constituents, right? I think it's really the responsibility of that city. So I'm curious how you think about it and actual state of the curb today.
So I think the state of the curb today is, in one word, it's a little chaotic, right? I think it's chaotic, and everybody's competing. And I do think that the pandemic enhanced what we were seeing before. And the use of the curb now, I don't think we're going to go back to it just because the pandemic hopefully will be go away soon. I think that you will continue to see the parcel deliveries increase. And now, before you didn't have the Uber and Lyft during the pandemic, but now they're back. The food and deliveries drop off and pickup has not curbed, right, for lack of a better word. So that all has now remained. Now you have valet back on the curb, people wanting to do valet. And then you have the customer that wants to park and go to the store. So I think that this prompted us to move faster. And this task force, we worked tirelessly on this task force to get the sample that Janet was putting up on the board of the areas in the city where we are feeling a pinch to see how we can actually address it. I think that there's been a lot of conversation on curb management. You know, in my industry, the parking industry, that's like the buzzword, and then next year will be another buzzword. But are we going to address the issue? And I think it's an issue that became a discussion, and now we need to take action, right? And so I think that if we do that and we do digitize that information, we could help better manage the curb. It's going to be a heavy lift. It's not easy. And we definitely need to work with the private sector to put forth good policy that our legislators could also defend us on and push forward, as Carlos did make the call on the bigger companies to come in and join us so that we can make this work for us and every other city.
Yeah, I mean, I think saying it's not easy is almost an understatement. I mean, one of the, when you were describing that task force, it seemed to me that, you need the buy-in of a lot of people. You also need the execution. And then I guess also getting at, just one more question for you, Alex. I mean, how do you decide who actually gets the access or preferential, or is it evenly distributed? And, on a personal level, is there a group that you're partial to? Is there someone that you really want to help out?
I wish that was, no, the answer is everyone. Everyone is really competing for the space. I, for one, I'm guilty. I like to circle until I find that space in front of the store I'm going to. It's a reality, right? And I think that's true for a lot of people. And I think that everybody who's competing for the curb also wants that space. So I do think that on the loading and unloading zones, like the people who are actually doing the big parcel delivery, folks, it's not that I want to help them first. I think that if I can get them to work with us on digitizing what that curb may look like, and then they can spread that to other cities, I think they're the lower hanging fruit for me. That's what I think. I may be wrong. I won't know that until we start really having those deep conversations with them. And I'm talking about their policymakers, not the people that we just speak to every day, their government affairs people. We need to speak to the people who actually do the work, to tell us this is a reality we can do or we can't, so that we stop talking about this in theory and actually put it in play.
So Julio, so you're running one of these companies, Helbiz, as CFO, that is, I guess you would say, fighting for or using access on the curb. How do you think about all of this?
Yeah, so definitely we can say that these are challenges, but we see big opportunities behind them. And as an operator, now, especially that we are coming out of this difficult time during the pandemic, we now look at the future and really understand what is here to stay. Definitely micromobility is an extremely dynamic sector that has evolved very quickly, but we've been together with the local administration and the policymakers really helping them to understand which is the best solution. So definitely technology is a key enabler. We're one of the players that can really make things happen. So test things together with the advisors and with the policymakers and understand what's working. And if needed, we can then adjust it or improve it going forward. Another thing is that, our scooters now, we also operate bicycles and moped, but these means of transportation are now essential. So we've really seen that throughout the pandemic, it was harsh times. We were extremely proactive in keeping the service going because people started really relying on it. And now that we're coming out and we look at the future, we see that this trend is continuing. So people really rely on them. It's important for us and for our competitors to have a structured way of doing stuff that is organized. But at the same time, we need to also be able to position them in the correct areas, in the right areas. As we're collecting the data, we really understand which are the areas that have much more usage of them. So it's really a time now. We have an opportunity, I would say, that now that we're coming out in this new area and this new time, we can really start planning things for the future and enable more and more services going forward.
Well, so let's talk about micromobility for a second, because even though I'm the rideshare guy, I'm a bit partial to micromobility. I think the opportunities from e-bikes and e-scooters, I think really, really before the pandemic, we were starting to see a lot of the negative externalities of Uber and Lyft. It turns out if there's tens of thousands of, untrained Uber drivers in your city, they can cause some havoc with pickups and drop-offs and congestion. So what are the problems, facing micromobility right now, and how do you solve those challenges? I know cities, especially early on, we're worried about, where you park them, whether it's on the street, in corrals, safety issues with actual riders. What are you guys thinking about and working through right now as a, micromobility operating? I just saw one right here on the street outside our venue.
Yeah, so I would say that the quality of service is the most important aspect. As an operator, since we're providing a service to our customers, we want to make sure that it's efficient, our scooters are well taken care of, they're parked correctly. And to achieve this, we do it because we hire our own employees. So we have our own personnel, they're trained. We have very interesting synergies given the fact that we operate multiple type of electric vehicles. And having said that, in this way, we are able to prove to the cities, when also we are up for renewal of the licenses, that we've been a good operator, guaranteeing the quality of service. In terms of parking, yes, it was a big issue at the beginning. Definitely today, with technology and with method, and this, I would say, mix of both technology, understanding the data, but also having personnel that is ready to intervene if it's needed. Consider that our employees are anyway always around the city. They rebalance them, they reposition the scooters, and they take care of the service. So all of these tie into a track record, a story that operators like us then need to prove, and together then with the administrations, if something needs to be adjusted or improved, we're definitely a partner and for them.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I've always found strange with micromobility is, one of the top issues, especially at the start with e-scooters, was the fact that, people didn't like where they were parked, or, they were on the curb or in the way. And obviously not everyone can pick up a scooter and move it, but that is a pretty simple solution, right? Just to pick up a scooter and move it, and or paint some lines on the street, to at least test, to at least get some. I saw we had a little parking corral outside that someone taped down on the sidewalk, right? So I'm curious, either John or Alex, if you want to chime in, like when it comes to cities dealing with some of these new technologies, like when scooters come on the curbs, or whatever that next technology that's going to come and want access to the curb, how do you think about, kind of quickly or maybe not so quickly implementing a pilot or something that allows, and allows for innovation and new technology while still balancing, the needs of your constituents or, folks, looking for access to these services?
I'm not from a city, so I can't speak as a city, but I can certainly talk about some of the city customers we have. And I mean, one of the visions I know LA had when they first started in trying to address some of the things that Julia was talking about was the city has this unique perspective that in addition to all the other innovation, they still have to have some basic services that the citizens and residents expect. And at the end of the day, only the city has that unique stewardship perspective to try and balance all of what is usable in the access space. And so when LA came about, it was like, okay, how do we do this? And so LA's big vision, and that's what then yielded the OMF and whatnot, was to say, can we contemplate our space, like Mayor Suarez says, can we contemplate something like a playground? But can we contemplate space as a product? And can we start meeting the tech companies at the intersection of how product companies build product for platforms? Yeah. I mean, if you want to build for a Google phone, you know to go to Google and get the Android SDK to learn all the rules to figure out how to build an application. A very similar concept is where the OMF, like if you're an OMF city, you have some fundamental infrastructure that you're beginning to stand up to explain to companies.
And for those who don't know, what is the OMF?
OMF is the Open Mobility Foundation. It's a not-for-profit open source foundation created originally brought together by 15 cities, Miami being one of the founding members. It now is home to about 48 different cities are members, and municipalities and others. It is the owner of the MDS Mobility Data Specification, which is what you've been hearing Urban Air and some of the other modes talk about. And it's a way for cities to kind of do what we were talking about here, which is to stand up and say, for tech companies, paint and signs and symbols is how the humans have always worked. But as technology and innovation is coming, as Mayor Sparrow says, do I still want to use some of those instruments? Is there a way that I can do something better and yet still not abandon my stewardship? And so a number of the cities have come together and said they think they have an answer. It is the MDS and forums like that. So the OMF is a forum by cities for cities where they guide technology development so that if a new company comes up, I want to go to a city like Miami. Miami says, well, we're an OMF city. Like, okay, great. What does that mean?
Mhm.
Here's how to show up. Here's what I need to be worried about. And the goal ultimately is low friction for innovation, very quick wins for the technology company, very quick wins for the city, because quite frankly, and honestly, as cities have learned, if these modes of transportation or innovation work, they offer lots of things. Sustainability, they remove the single occupancy vehicle, they help achieve some of the other goals that the city has in moving people and goods more efficiently and better, right? There are ways to win if all stakeholders have equal voices and expression. So that's where the OMS sort of basis is. And so, again, cities here, and you're seeing this MDS story, it's about that ability so that companies like Helbis can be created, show up, deliver. Organizations like MPA can stand up and say, here's what we need, and then companies can come together and that conversation happens.
I think in part what happens is that great ideas and we push them forward, like the scooters in Miami. We struggled a little bit with having scooters in Miami and whether they were on the floor, and a lot of people started disliking them, but you can't challenge the fact that the ridership is so high that people are actually using these to get around. We just partnered with Swift Mile because they've had a product that we could actually put a corral, and it wasn't so much for the private companies, but even the people who are actually using it. And we did see at first, the feedback was, does anybody own a scooter that's not a private company? I'm like, yes, plenty of people own a scooter that's not a private company. My kids do. So then we started seeing the usage, and we're hoping that this starts putting things in perspective and in place so that we can see that we can all coexist. Micromobility, all types of micromobility could coexist in the city in a very well put together manner, in an organized manner, because I don't think the people have an issue. The community as a whole, the public has an issue with, they talk about safety and they talk about, the mess that they leave on the ground. But if we can actually use the digital information infrastructure to make sure that these companies are also held accountable for, what they do on the street. You can't just put this kind of equipment on the street and think that you're going to turn around and move away from that, because us as the public sector, we have a responsibility to the public to make sure that they're able to walk on the sidewalks, and they're able to cross the street, and somebody could come with a stroller, and someone who's disabled can get around with a wheelchair. Those things are important, and us as a parking authority, that's what we deal with. We have to clean all that mess up so that the public can actually have accessibility to the sidewalk, and to the public right of way. And so I think that if we can work together, and I think that that's when the public and private sectors have to come together. We can't do it by ourselves, and neither can the private sector. We have to be mutually respectful of each other and our rules and policies. And I think that that is something that John is talking about, what they did in LA, where we can easily shut you down when something doesn't go the right way and you don't abide by the rules. The thing is that there has to be some rules. And I think that we can all get there. We'll have a much better system. The thing is that the system came before the rules came. Yeah. And I think in part, in everything that we do, and I talked about it to my staff all the time, what is the policy? We have the ability to put policy in place before everything comes. We talked about urban air mobility yesterday. What are the policies that we're gonna work around that, so when the Jetsons do land here, we are ready to go, and then we don't have to be working backwards. But that doesn't mean that just because we've had some struggles, I think we learn from our struggles, right? Sometimes we just grow from it's growing pains. And we're gonna have that. No matter what we do, we're going to have that. We talked about it this morning on the curb with John. At the end of the day, I may love to work with a parcel delivery, and we may have to have a person just standing there all day watching people come in and out of a space until we can really monitor it and make sure that we know how people are reacting to the space, and we can teach each other how to better manage that. So it is a heavy lift, but I think we could get there.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, and I mean, I think a couple things that stood out to me. I mean, when you think about private companies working with cities, I mean, I actually feel like sometimes, the goals or the customers, of a private company, I think like who they're working for, who they're building products, like the system that they're putting in place is actually kind of obvious, right? They're trying to serve their customer. At the Miami Parking Authority, who is your customer? And how do you think about, I mean, is it just, people dining, or is it, the general population, right? Because, you mentioned people with disabilities, right? I mean, I know that I've heard the terms equity, access thrown around. I know those are important mandates of cities, and you have to think about, everyone beyond just those who might be riding a scooter or calling for an Uber or a Lyft. But how do you think about your customer, I guess would be a good question, or do you think about it in those terms?
Our customer is anyone who uses our infrastructure, our spaces, anyone that needs parking as a whole, no matter who you are. It could be you need parking for 5 minutes because you're delivering something, or you're going to be here all day, or you're going to be a monthly customer, you're going to be a resident. Residents are our customers too. So I think about every user as a customer, and quite frankly, I think all of us, parking is the first thing that you encounter when you go somewhere, and the last thing you remember when you leave a location. That's the way we see it. And so, having that conversation and an open dialogue, which I also think that in general we don't do great, is having that conversation with the public. You need to educate the public, because we could do all this digital, we talk about, technology, but if the public doesn't understand it, it would be very difficult for us to put anything in place, right? And I say that all the time. My IT director sitting back there, and so I always have a lot of things in my head that I spit out to him, and then he translates it for everybody else, because I speak in a different language, and it's very hard sometimes for me to wrap my arms around technology as a whole. What we're trying to do, what does that mean, digitizing a space? But so it's a learning process that I think we need to teach the public. We need to teach our local authorities as well. And I think that goes for me and every other city. And I think it's about me, micromobility, the parking. Everyone needs to be taught what this really means and what the future is going to look like. I really do think that no matter what and how much we want to sometimes dig our heels, the next 3 to 5 years are going to be very telling for us. So we have to either join the movement and learn as much as we can, but I think we do need to have an educational process.
Well, hello, here we go. But just something to weigh in on what Alex said just prompts me is we've been here before. I mean, prior to 1910, people just used the public right away. I mean, we had horses, we had bikes, we had the very earliest form of micromobility, people walking, right? And then cars showed up. And the very first stop sign got created in 1910, and we had to teach people what a stop sign was. And then we had to create rules, and we built a future starting with the first sign in 1910. And so today we look at that and we're like, maybe it's fine, but it's not great. And so now we've learned from this. And so the next time is like, there is a lift, there is an education process. And so now the question is, now that cities understand what can happen if you're not careful about how you let your public space be used, what's the future you want? So part of the Open Mobility Foundation and some of the city conversations is come together and can you define the output? Can you define what that future looks like? And the future balances companies like Julia. They balance innovation, they balance the startup, they balance the multi-billion-dollar corp, and they balance the resident, whether the resident is able-bodied or is disabled. All those stakeholders now at the forefront. And what cities are beginning to realize is they do have a voice. Mm-hmm. They do have the ability to adopt a certain level of language, and they do have people like Henry, her IT person, who's now learning how to translate. And everyone's coming together, and we're beginning to learn, right? It is a process, though. It is a process that's going to take years. And shows like CoMotion are thank you again, John Rassan, for doing this. It brings this opportunity for everybody to come together, and start having that conversation, understanding there are some shared goals and outcomes.
Yeah, well,
I wanted to add one interesting concept with regards to multimodality and how players like us are already doing this. So what we're doing in terms of also educating the general public, but also the institutions, is that we partner with public transportation companies. And how do we do this? We've been actually one of the first operators that opened up through APIs and integrated our platform. So our app in order to use it also for public transportation and seamlessly move around. So also these type of activities that we do, we are actually one of the few ones that have this type of more open type of business model and vision, is really to help people move around. And is it using the scooter for the first mile and then hop on the bus or the metro and then find the parking. So all this ties into how we are also helping the general public to change also the way they move around.
Yeah, no, and I mean, I can definitely agree with that. I've done some scooter charging in the past, and I was always amazed by, the number of scooters that were being picked up or dropped off at transit stations. And this is in Los Angeles too, where, there's more limited options when it comes to public transit, but subways and metros. So it kind of, John, when you were talking, it kind of made me think, I mean, our cars, are they sort of the bad boys of the curb then? Are they the one causing all the issues? Who can we blame here?
Who can we blame? Wow. I don't think this is not a blame game. I think, no, again, I think what I think we've learned is the evolution of innovation and the evolution of history. Cities are beginning to realize that it is, again, to Mayor Suarez, credit to Mayor Suarez, credit to Mayor Levine Cava, welcoming innovation, but then welcoming innovation on a playing field or a playing area that is in essence sort of constructed and sort of overseen by the city. Because at the end of the day, truly the city or the municipality is, each of us live in some level of a municipality, and each of us have, through our form of democratic government, wherever we are, have given and ceded some level of delegated authority to the city to make sure that the space that we live in is usable, accessible, allows us to build, allows us to live, allows us to have our children, and it just allows us to live a full life. Whether we are in the world, it's generally the same thing. So from that standpoint, and part of the storytelling that we do with the OMF is bringing and giving cities the language to now be able to enter into the conversations with technology companies and say, let's not worry about who's to blame. Maybe it's collectively all of us not realizing, but now that we understand space is limited and that there is innovation and that there are new ways to do things, again, calling back to where Mayor Suarez was yesterday, how to do that in a way that is sustainable, that achieves the outcomes that we're all interested in, and more importantly, sets us up for a world where our children's children look back and say, wow, I'm really glad that my grandparents did that. I'm really glad that they actually focused and forced everybody to understand how to play right in this playground of the public right away.
Yeah, makes sense. And I mean, I think we're, I really appreciate the discussion. We are going to probably open it up here to questions in maybe 10 or 15 minutes, if that sounds good. So everyone in the audience, start thinking about some good questions. Otherwise, I've got plenty more in the repertoire that I can ask. And, you had a phrase, I think you said limited space, right? So there's limited space on the curb, and obviously there's a lot of demand for that space. So I'll open it up to the entire panel. Are there certain, I guess, use cases you would say that would have the biggest impact right now, where maybe there's an issue that could be fixed, or you see it going into the future? Hey, if we did this one thing, it could be an amazing opportunity. Julia, I have a feeling I know what you might answer, but for the rest of the panel, anyone, I'll leave it open if anyone wants to chime in.
Definitely, I think the strain that we're seeing, so we have the CBD, right? The Central Business District, and there's a lot of movement there to close down the public parking. Actually, not movement, it's happening. They're in the middle of construction to close down all the public parking on Flagler Street, which is a main corridor in downtown. So what do we do? What do we do with the loading and unloading, and everything's getting infilled? There's a lot of residential being built. We are seeing a lot of tech, folks coming down and moving to Miami. And how do they get their furniture up? And how do they get their parcel delivery packages? And so I think that the easiest thing for us would be to address loading and unloading right now. And if we can address that, and we could figure out what is it that how do we accommodate them? How do we get them to work in this space so that we can figure out where do they go? Where do we put these loading zones? This data will provide us with a lot of information as to where they have to go. do they belong on this street? Do we provide it on an avenue? We have to think about the growth of the city. The city is not going to be stagnant anytime soon, right?
And this would be across different services.
Correct.
So ride hail, food delivery,
Everything.
anything that
Because
kinda
that
needs
street
unloading
now,
or
that street, which is, it's two-way, it's a two-way street, but it's one lane on each side, going east and west. There'll only be capacity for loading and unloading at certain times of the day, and the rest becomes a valet spot, right? And so what happens to all the other competing forces that exist there today? Where do they go? And so that's the stuff that we have to address now. So when that does happen and that construction is done in 2 years or so, we already have a plan.
Yeah, I was gonna sort of doubling down on what Alex said. I mean, I'm not from LA. I'm from Chicago. A big call for the Midwest. One of the things that was interesting to me to learn, right, is LA had the '84 Olympics, and if you talk to any Angelino, and you say, do you like LA traffic? The one period of time they'll say it was really cool was in '84, which was great when the Olympics were there. And what they did was a form of what Alex is talking about. They used to do with people, paper, and pencil. They shut down roads, they redirected things, they worked with cargo and freight, and they basically moved by paper what we today would assume just would be done digitally, but they were able to then reconstruct and reconstitute the public right away for a period of about 3 or 4 weeks. And in so doing that, they began to realize that everybody was able to move. And they look back fondly, that's amazing. And so now you turn around and you say, okay, move forward. Well, how can we do the same thing? Because it's exactly the same issue. How do I reconstitute? And I'll give a call out to NACTO and their 2017 autonomous blueprint for urbanism. It was the idea of, hey, what are the use cases? If you have not read it, I would encourage you to read it. It's assume autonomy comes in all of its forms over all the modes. What can a city do with its urban space? And how does the city get to be able to reuse the space, both the air and the ground? And how do you do that? And then how do you demonstrate that to the companies that want to use it, right? So when you say, what do you want to solve? It is this multi-use of space, but it's the expression of it in a dynamic way that allows innovation companies like this to say, okay, great, on this day at this time, I'm able to do this, but I have to do something different tomorrow. And I can know that the system works and I can build and trust, and then I can build my business model against it. So solving the multimodal, but the expression of it in a way that allows innovation to build, I think is maybe not the low-hanging fruit, but it's probably the fruit to go after.
Yeah, John, I would add, so to stress the fact of flexibility. So as also Alejandra was saying, so yes, the beauty, let's say, of micromobility and the scooters is that we can move them around. We can have a parking just in the morning or in the afternoon. We're now collecting all this data, so we actually understand what the citizens, how they move, which time, and so it really all comes down to continuing the evolution and the working on this platform with the data that is shared. And if at a specific time or there is a specific event, we immediately receive this indication. And for us, it's very, very quick and easy just to move the scooters or move the parking, and it's not an issue. So it all comes down to flexibility and having the correct data and the right communication.
Got it. Got it. John, you mentioned autonomous, and it kind of made me think, okay, we're planning for all of these things right now, but what about these future opportunities, whether they are autonomous or maybe something that we haven't seen? You know, I know we've got a cool, basically hovercraft over there that you can sit on.
Submarine?
We've got a submarine, we've got a hovercraft, we've got some cool vehicles, we've got a cool race car over here. I recommend, I didn't ask, but I just sat down in a few of them and no one yelled at me, so I think you're okay. But I mean, how do you plan for these future modes and also the modes that aren't there? Because I'll be frank, you know, like I talked about picking up and dropping off as an Uber and Lyft driver, and you know, I'm not an expert on the technology side of AVs, but when they do come, they're not going to be able to legally pick up or drop off in the entire city, I'm guessing, because if you want to legally drop someone off, you're going to be circling the block for you know, hours. And so I'm curious how you think about these future modes.
Well, for me, and then for many of our city clients and customers, and when I speak publicly, I always go back to, we'll go back to Apple or Google or anyone who's built a platform. When they first started, they didn't know, like when Apple first released or when Google first released Android, they didn't know what was going to get built.
Right.
But what they did know is that if they did it the right way, meaning the platform, the ability, the rules, and the reach, that innovation would come, and the innovation would then fuel the platform, and the platform would fuel innovation, and you get a nice flywheel effect. And so for us, talking to cities is like, you are the platform, like you are the platform, you are through your citizenry, you are delegated the authority of the most incredible platform ever, space. But it's also the most limited platform ever. Even if we go vertically, it's at some point in time, there's a limit. And so, how can you as a city begin to, accept and receive innovation? There are other examples to look at. And so not abdicating your city stewardship, there are things I think that you can learn from the private industry on how to build a platform, how to express the platform. So that's sort of the key messaging that sits behind the OMF and all of its members is, how do we come together collectively? Recognizing that we ultimately, I am an owner of the platform in Chicago. I mean, I live in Chicago. It is part of my public right of way. So how do I, as both a citizen, but then as a technology person, actually help the cities to do this the right way? Because if they don't do it the right way, the innovation will come and it will be messy. And if they do it the right way, then the innovation will come, it won't be messy, and it can be very, very beneficial, as Alex pointed out. So that there's a balance there. It's definitely a needle be thread, but I think we have enough examples in the world with enough companies like Helvis that would say, yeah, this is worth doing. It's worth doing.
Information from AVs is brought up a very good point. I mean, they're not even in our right now what we're dealing with at the very moment, but we've been speaking to Ford and Argo for, I don't know, upwards of probably 3.5 years when they first started. And if you ever actually get in an AV, it's the most amazing experience, right? But they need a space. They need a particular space. It's not you can have a driver and they could squeeze into a smaller space to go do a pickup and drop off. Like you say, are they going to circle? How do we address that technology? That's, again, us having to be ahead of the curve because that's coming. And so how do we address them? You're absolutely right. They will never be able to do anything legally, especially when there's no one in the car to figure out who they're going to cut off to get into that space, And so I think that that's something that we have had open conversations with Ford about what the future is going to bring and what that policy is going to look like, because they need it and they don't only need one space. They probably need 3 spaces to be able to get in, get out. It's a different, their rules are a little different than the regular vehicle. So all of this has to get addressed and we need to start moving in that direction. And I think that's why we say the first chip that falls is going to be the chip and then everything will fall right after that.
Got it. Thank you for that. So I think we've got a little time left for some questions, and I think there are a couple mics floating around. So if anyone has a question, feel free to raise your hand, and I think someone will come to you with a mic. Sure. And also, maybe just if you want to address your question to a specific panelist, that'd be helpful too.
Is this working?
Yes, now it is
working. I'd like to address it all panelists because I'd like your thoughts on this. One of the things I had my first trip back to New York since we were allowed to go, and one thing I noticed, the biggest change in Manhattan was that all of the curbside parking spaces are now taken up with restaurant seating, and they did it in such a beautiful way. And it struck me that Manhattan has been so enhanced by the terrible experience of having to create all of this outdoor seating. It was so creative and so beautiful. And so what role does aesthetics play in this question? Because I think it's a really important piece. Manhattan is now more welcoming than it's ever been. And it's much harder to drop things off and get your taxi down McDougal Street when the street's lined with outdoor seating and then there's a delivery truck, you're stuck. At the same time, the experience on foot is so much more pleasant than it's ever been. What is the role of aesthetics and who is the priority? Is it the parker? Is it the walker? Is it the restaurant?
So I could take a stab at it, and I think it's not going to be a one. It's not the one answer, but in the city, we did something very similar. In order for us to help the restaurants enhance and increase their capacity for their patrons, we were able to provide the parking spaces for them to put outdoor seating. And we're still going with that program, and it was free to the restaurants so they could get back on their feet. And I think it was a well-received program. And it's something that we're going to have in place for a couple of months until we decide, well, what's going to happen, or is it something that you have to deal with all the policymakers too? Do you beautify it? What are the restrictions as it relates to safety for these outdoor seating spaces? But then the space is taken out, right? The parking space is taken out. And then you have the retailers, which is the feedback we have gotten. That's great for restaurants, but what happens to the people who want to come and visit my retail space? We're like, okay, well, there may be parking. There's plenty of parking. People just don't want to walk. The weather sometimes in Miami doesn't provide you good cover for walking. Women wear heels. It's raining, they're here. So there's a lot of that happens. We're experiencing that now in Coconut Grove. It's a beautiful, they've closed down the street. There's a lot on Commodore. There's a lot of seating now on the street, which is beautiful. People are, I went there about 2 weeks ago and I thought, wow, this place it's coming back. And it was packed. But there is that competition. There's that competition for even the parking space. And who comes first? There is a revenue source that comes from that parking space. Where does that go? Where does that get diverted to? And so I think that is something that remains to be seen, especially here in Miami, which we had never had that. There's a lot of cities that do. A lot of cities have closed down their streets and have made it just a pedestrian friendly. Coral Gables did that, something very similar. And there may be some designated streets in the city that do that. I don't think it's going to be everywhere in the city, but I think that we may be going in that direction. All good and well knowing that it will affect, sometimes it affects people for a shorter period of time until they get used to it. But we are working with that dynamic right now.
Yeah, and I mean, one thing you mentioned, it was interesting to consider, I guess, the retailer's point of view too, right? Because they're not necessarily taking advantage of this outdoor seating. It seems like, through anecdotes, it seems like almost in every city that has launched these outdoor, seating areas and options, it seems like everybody really loves it. I was in Culver City in Los Angeles the other day, and they completely transformed one of the streets. And I was up high, and I took a picture and tweeted the mayor of Culver City, and he actually replied to me and said that they were looking at keeping it, and that I think excited me. One thing though, it seems like micromobility is a really interesting option, to, for example, like when you now have limited space, you have limited parking. As soon as you said limited parking, I thought to myself, well, about 12 scooters can fit in the space of one car. What's the reaction been, especially during the pandemic, from either retailers or restaurants? How do businesses that you've talked to think about micromobility?
Yeah, so during the pandemic, I have to say that we have been very creative, and we really approached retail stores, businesses, together with them to really understand how we could help them as well. So one of the examples is what we did is we created essentially dedicated parking spots through partnerships. And in this way, we were able also to convey more customers to them, or bring more customers to them. So this is a simple example that has been also very, very effective. Another point is
you're basically saying you would want businesses would want to have scooters parked out front because people are now ending their trips in a corral, and then they look up and they see your business, right?
Correct, exactly. And it's inevitable that the cities are changing. We see now more and more cycling lanes. We are actually providing that data to administration to understand where to draw them and where to deploy them. So it's true. So it will take some time. It's not something that's going to happen immediately, but definitely people will need to start already move in a different way. So they will probably then start parking their cars in specific areas and then move around the city also with other type of means of transportation.
Got it. Any other questions out in the audience? Sure, we've got one in the back, I think right behind you to the right.
Hi guys, thanks for all the great work you're doing here in the city. As a local, I'm really interested in learning about how to just keep up and follow some of the conversations, how to be involved with the commission, the committees that are being put together for the task forces, and how, as a resident and as somebody that is also in developing some of the smart city work here, how we could be able to plug in. So we have this data as a unified platform, and that can be shared with other residents and the city of Miami and the other 32 municipalities in Miami-Dade County. So we can start unifying a little bit of the efforts across the different municipalities. So that's sort of one data governance and just like conversational ask. And the second of it is, what's the technical backbone that exists today or needs to be laid down in order to expand on the pilots that are being done today? Thank you.
Yeah. So answering the second one first, the technical backdrop, I would give a shout out to Carlos in Miami-Dade County. They're working to try and build an infrastructure that does mimic some of the other cities, most notably LA, but other cities who are sort of deploying. And so the backdrop of that is underway by Carlos and team, which is underpinning each of us, both the urban air and smart curb. In terms of integrating with them, I will ask to maybe afterwards we can come talk about it, because this is not meant to be, absolutely everything is open, even the notes and the minutes and whatnot, but I don't know how best to answer your question as to how to integrate. So if you are okay with it, I will follow up and we'll make sure we get connected with Carlos, because the answer is there is absolutely a willingness and a want for this to happen. And so thankfully on this show, we're going to connect and we can figure out where that is and how that works. And once that happens, we can publish through CoMotion and other areas and other avenues. If you have the same question, how do you get that? So it's a great question. I don't have the how to do it at this moment, but we can give you the how to offline with Carlos and we can make it more broadly available. Are you okay with that? Okay,
yeah.
Great. Thank you.
And I mean, I'll even be honest, I think a part of that first answer is, through conferences like CoMotion. I mean, just from sitting up here, I think we, two things that have stood out to me are the different city perspectives. You talk Chicago, LA, and Miami, and your Olympics example was perfect. I'd heard that before, but it was sort of a good reminder. I mean, 1984 was a long time ago for some people. I wasn't even born yet, but sorry, John. Sorry,
boy.
John.
There we go. Okay. There we go.
So much.
There we go.
Sorry, John. But it sort of made me think that there are these opportunities geographically, right? Like if LA is doing one thing and Miami doesn't know about what they're doing, and even within Miami, right? Like you talked about the 39 different districts or counties, whatever it was, right? I mean, how do you share that knowledge? Because like some of the stuff that we're like, this is complex stuff. There's a lot going on, and if I imagine if each municipality or city tried to tackle this on their own, that would be a lot of people, and there's a lot going on in a city. So how do you share that knowledge?
Well, and that's I go back, and I don't want to keep overplaying the card there, but I will double down on Mayor Suarez. He wants to talk about the tech community, which is great. Mayor Levine Cava wants to talk about the tech community. How do we solve in the tech world? We have conferences and others, but we have platforms, we have users, we come together around a sort of rallying cry, right? Often brought forward by the platform company, but in this case, it is the city. So for the cities like Miami, Miami-Dade County, Miami Parking, all members of the OMF, that is where they're trying to have the conversation. They're trying to surface the questions. They're trying to bring forward these concerns and say, okay, great. How do I deal with the residency concern? How do I deal with the concern of privacy? How do I deal with the concern of restricted space? How do I deal with the concern of the interaction with the feds? I mean, we start talking about urban air. That's even bigger. Like we got the FAA, but the FAA's also got to worry about other countries because now we got multiple airspaces that we're talking about, right? So it is not easy, but there are patterns for how it's been solved in other areas. And so the goal that we always want to get the cities around is you can come together. There's an oft phrase that they use, cities work better when they work together. Well, this is a way for them to work together through the OMF as a platform of space. But then each city still gets to do their own thing on how they're going to ultimately locally manage the space. But that gives companies like Helbiz an opportunity to say, okay, great, if I build to this, I know I'm guaranteed to work anywhere that those cities are operating. And that's kind of, I think, how that ultimately, and again, it's a long journey. It doesn't happen overnight.
And I think to go on what you just said, and in the parking industry, we're known as leaders in the parking industry, the parking authority, and we've taken very calculated risk on some pilots that we've rolled out. And I think that this is such a foreign subject to so many people that a lot of cities are not willing to take the risk. They just continue to do what they do because it works. And they want to see how a city like ours, city like Seattle, a city like LA is going to put this forth and see how that works before they even take the plunge. So I think it's important for us. It's important for us to create something that can be also utilized across the country, because you're gonna put all this effort in just for yourself, even though there are things that are particular to the city. But I think that if we're gonna put this forward and we're working with these groups, we're working on it because everybody wants to get to the same end goal.
Yeah, I mean, I know one of the cool things too about a lot of these new mobility and logistics and transportation services is you can actually use them too. I'm gonna put the audience on the spot for a second. Who's actually ridden one of the scooters, one of the e-scooters out there? So we got pretty good coverage out there, maybe half or a little bit more than half the people, but I feel like you can really, it can
Definitely grow.
we can get a lot more on there, right? I know a guy who might be able to get you maybe a free code for a scooter ride or something like that. But I mean, I do think that being able to actually try these products and try these services, actually gives you some insight without having to, really, many people have taken an Uber and Lyft, but I do remember in the early days, there were a lot of people looking at it and talking about it or regulating it or whatever it might be. But, they were taxi users, for example, right? And it's a pretty simple, I'm not saying you need to take one every day, but it does seem like that's a kind of a quicker, actionable step. Are there any other sort of shortcuts or tips or tricks you've seen?
No, I mean, look at the mopeds, not
Yeah.
even the scooters. We have mopeds too. We have the electric bikes.
Yeah,
So
I've
some
seen the
people are
Rebel
not,
scooters here.
the Rebel scooters, and some people are not very comfortable with
Yeah.
a scooter. So the first time I took a ride on a scooter was in Denver, and there's parking that comes from underground, and the car was coming up, and I thought I almost was going to kill myself. But that was my first ride on the scooter. And after that, I've ridden the scooter to get from point A quickly to point B, and it's been great. And I think that last mile trip is very important as well. We talk about that all the time. And I think you have options. There's options. There's a bicycle if you're more comfortable with a bicycle, and you have the mopeds if you're more comfortable with that. So I think there's all kinds of, look at all the things that Miami has. Anything that you could try. It's just getting us to all speak the same language as it relates to policy and making it good for the entire community, because we do have, again, a responsibility to the community and to the public.
Oh, okay. I think that's a good note. Do we have time for another question? Okay, we've got a few minutes. So if anyone is out there with a burning question or something really good for our panelists, I think we've got time for maybe one more question. Anyone out there?
We have a question from the online audience.
Cool.
Question was asked, should the private operators take more stewardship to ensure safe interaction between micromobility users and pedestrians? What are some things each of you can contribute to the safety discussion?
Okay, I can say that we continuously organize events to show the people our service, help them to understand, to onboard on the platform, understand how it works, address all the issues with regards to safety. So we continuously do this. Consider that we are in a regulated sector. So this is also one of the requirements when we receive the licenses. And we see this that is extremely effective because first of all, we bridge that gap, maybe that fear that can be at the beginning. And at the same time, we also get feedback and we continuously improve or educate and understand how to do things better. So definitely technology then is here, is evolving very quickly. There are now solutions to limit the speed of these vehicles if they are on the curb or on the street, give notice to pedestrians if a scooter is approaching. So all this is currently happening. We see that as things now evolve and also people start using it more, they become also much more conscious about it, much more respectful. And we see this just by an example. At the beginning, people were using them, parking them randomly. Now we see this also, the users are the first really people that park them in the correct way and take care of our vehicles as well.
I just, I'm struck. There's a concept of transportation called mode blindness. mode blindness, meaning whatever mode you're on, you're blind at any other mode. Sometimes called windshield bias if you're in a car, but you know, in a scooter, you're on a scooter, you're kind of blind to anything and everything else you're moving. If you're a walker, if you're a pedestrian, you're kind of blind to everything else until it potentially comes to hit you, right? So I think that the culture of safety writ large, right, regardless of the mode, is a constant message. And in some cases, there are things that providers can do, there are things that cities can do, there are things that tech companies that build platforms that enable. But fundamentally, this is a public service message that continually has to happen every year with every generation, right? So public safety or safety is going to be something that will never, probably ever stop. It's a constant reminder with shows like this and others that safety is the ultimate goal, because lacking safety, we will have loss of life at the worst case, and profound disruption to the system and the movement and the enjoyment ultimately of life.
Yeah, the mode blindness is really interesting because I think you have the opportunity, if someone is typically behind a windshield and they see the biker running the stop sign, or they see them taking up too much space, it's not until you're in the seat of that biker where you realize, wow, it's a lot of energy to stop at this stop sign and then go, and you can kind of more easily wave them across. So I do think there's something there to, sort of building that empathy across different modes. If you're typically someone who is driving a car, how do you get someone to at least, go try a scooter or go try a bike? They don't need to do it every day or, for their commute. But if you get them onto that mode that one time, I think it builds empathy across different modes. So cool. Well, I think, sure. Here, let's grab a mic for you.
Hi, thank you. I'm from California, and your idea of awareness made me think of something that you may already be doing, but I was thinking of like a mini mobility day. And you would create public awareness around that. And therefore you would publicize it in the news and different areas, but you could have little snippets that refer to the safety. How do you check things in and out? And it could be a public-private partnership where you work together with all of the mini mobility providers. But if you're not doing that, it's just a thought that came to mind.
Well, I think the good news is that we will be doing that in November at CoMotion Los Angeles. So I know that we typically have a lot of different micromobility and other options, mobility options. So that should be pretty cool. I think on that note, we're going to go ahead and end this panel. Really appreciate everyone tuning in online, listening. Thank you to Julio from Helbiz, John from Ellis and Associates in Lacuna, and Alex from the Miami Parking Authority. And we've got plenty more programming scheduled for this day. So definitely stick around and keep on tuning in. Thank you.